It was the kind of morning that tests your spirit. Cold, gray, and heavy with drizzle. The kind that seeps through your shoes and into your bones, reminding you of everything that's gone wrong in your life. But Emily Parker didn't have time to feel miserable. She tugged her thin jacket tighter, clutching her worn-out nurse's bag, and rushed down the street toward the bus stop. Her shift at St. Agnes Hospital started in 20 minutes, and missing that bus meant losing the only thing keeping her afloat, a job. She had already worked 3 double shifts that week, barely sleeping, barely eating, just to cover her younger brother's college fees. Their parents had passed away years ago, and Emily had been both guardian and provider ever since. Every cent mattered. Every minute mattered. As she reached the corner, she noticed a woman struggling near the entrance of a small bakery. The elderly woman was pale, clutching her chest, her knees buckling. Without hesitation, Emily dropped her bag and ran over. "Ma'am, are you all right?" she gasped, catching the woman just before she fell to the ground. The woman's lips trembled. I can't breathe." Emily's instincts kicked in. She guided the woman to the curb, checked her pulse, and loosened her scarf. "Stay with me, ma'am. You're going to be okay." Her voice was calm, though her heart pounded. She pulled out her stethoscope and assessed her. The pulse was weak. The woman was going into cardiac distress. Emily called for an ambulance, then held the woman's hand, murmuring softly, "You're not alone. Help is coming. Just breathe with me." By the time paramedics arrived, Emily's scrubs were soaked with rain. She climbed into the ambulance, refusing to leave the woman's side. "I'll go with her," she said, even though her shift at the hospital was about to start. The paramedics recognized her uniform and nodded. At St. Agnes Hospital, Emily helped stabilize the woman in the emergency ward. Hours passed before the woman regained consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing the kind of blue that carried both strength and sorrow. "You stayed," she whispered weakly. Emily smiled. "Of course, I couldn't just leave you." The old woman squeezed her hand. "Thank you, dear. I won't forget your kindness." Emily didn't know it then, but that small act of compassion was about to change her life forever. When the woman was transferred to a private room, Emily returned to her shift. Her supervisor scolded her for missing the start of her duty. "You can't keep bending the rules for every patient on the street, Emily," the charge nurse snapped. "We all care, but you need to care for yourself too." Emily just nodded, too tired to argue. Her paycheck barely covered rent, and she couldn't risk losing her job. That night, she walked home exhausted, her shoes squelching in the rain. But even through her fatigue, she thought of the old woman's fragile smile. There was something dignified about her, something that lingered in Emily's heart. 3 days later, Emily was called to the hospital's VIP ward. "Room 901, her supervisor said curtly. "The patient specifically requested you." Emily was puzzled. VIP patients were usually the city's elite, people with private doctors and bodyguards. She hesitated outside the door, then knocked. "Come in," said a soft but strong voice. It was her, the elderly woman from the street. She looked much better now, dressed in elegant silk pajamas, her silver hair neatly brushed. "My dear nurse," she said warmly. "I've been waiting to see you." Emily smiled shyly. "How are you feeling today, ma'am?" "Much better, thanks to you." The woman gestured for her to sit. "My name is Margaret Langford." The name struck a faint chord. Emily had heard it somewhere, on a magazine cover, perhaps. But she couldn't place it. "I wanted to thank you properly," Margaret continued. "You saved my life. Most people would have walked past a stranger in the rain, but you didn't." "I only did what anyone should do," Emily replied softly. Margaret smiled knowingly. Not everyone would have, especially when they have so little themselves. Emily's cheeks flushed. I don't expect anything in return." "That's exactly why you deserve it," Margaret murmured. After Margaret was discharged, Emily thought that was the end of it. But a week later, a sleek black car pulled up outside her apartment building. A man in a suit stepped out. "Miss Parker?" he asked politely. "Mrs. Langford requests your company for tea this afternoon." Emily almost refused. She had another shift, but something in her heart told her to go. When she arrived at the Langford mansion, her breath caught. The house was enormous, surrounded by blooming gardens and fountains. Inside, it smelled of lavender and old books. Margaret was waiting in the sitting room, sipping tea beside a roaring fire. You came, she said, smiling. I'm glad. I couldn't say no to you, Emily admitted with a grin. They talked for hours. Margaret asked about Emily's family, her dreams, her struggles. Emily told her everything, how she'd wanted to become a doctor but couldn't afford tuition, how she worked endless shifts to support her brother, how sometimes she skipped meals to pay the bills. Margaret listened, her eyes soft with compassion. You remind me of myself, she said finally. When I was young, I had nothing but determination. My husband and I built our fortune from scratch. But somewhere along the way, my son forgot what truly matters. Emily tilted her head. Your son, Margaret sighed. Daniel Langford, CEO of Langford Industries. Perhaps you've heard of him. Emily froze. Of course, Langford Industries was one of the biggest companies in the country. Daniel Langford was a billionaire, a man featured on magazine covers for his ruthless success. Yes, Emily said carefully. I've heard of him. Margaret's eyes dimmed. He's brilliant, but hardened. He believes money solves everything. Maybe you could help him see otherwise. Me? Emily blinked. I'm just a nurse. Margaret's smile deepened. That's exactly why. A few days later, Margaret invited Emily to a charity gala hosted by her son. Emily hesitated, she had nothing to wear, but Margaret insisted, sending over a beautiful dress and shoes. When Emily arrived at the ballroom, she felt completely out of place among the glittering crowd. And then she saw him. Daniel Langford was tall, impeccably dressed, and intimidating. His presence drew whispers and glances wherever he moved. When Margaret introduced them, he extended a hand politely, though his expression was distant. So you're the nurse who helped my mother, he said, his tone formal. She's spoken a great deal about you. I'm glad she's well, Emily replied, meeting his gaze. There was something piercing in his eyes, sharp, analytical, almost suspicious. As the evening went on, Daniel found himself watching her. Unlike the socialites around him, Emily wasn't trying to impress anyone. She laughed with the servers, thanked the musicians, and even comforted a young waiter who dropped a tray. There was an authenticity about her that disarmed him. After the event, Margaret smiled knowingly at her son. You see what I mean? Daniel frowned. She's kind. She's real, Margaret said softly. Something money can't buy. Weeks passed. Margaret often invited Emily to the mansion, sometimes for tea, sometimes to accompany her on charity visits. Slowly, Emily and Daniel began to cross paths more often. He would drive them to events, or join them for dinner. At first, he kept his distance. But one evening, when Margaret had gone to rest, Emily found Daniel alone in the garden. It's peaceful here, she said, sitting beside him. Daniel nodded. It's the only place where people stop asking for things. Emily looked at him gently. Not everyone wants something from you, Daniel. He gave a short, bitter laugh. That's easy for you to say. Maybe, she said softly, but when you expect everyone to have a price, you stop seeing their hearts. He turned to look at her, and for the first time, the steel in his eyes softened. Over the next few months, their connection grew. Daniel began visiting the hospital, quietly funding improvements under the radar. He watched Emily work, how she comforted frightened children, how she smiled even after 12-hour shifts, how she treated every patient with the same care. It stirred something in him, something he'd long buried. One evening, Emily received devastating news. Her brother had been in an accident at college, and the surgery costs were more than she could ever afford. She tried to stay strong, but in the quiet of the hospital corridor, she broke down. When Daniel found her, she was sitting on a bench, tears falling silently. What happened? He asked softly. She told him everything, voice trembling. I can't lose him, Daniel. He's all I have left. Without a word, Daniel made a call. Within hours, the best surgeons were preparing for the operation. Emily protested, but he stopped her gently. Let me do this, he said. You've saved lives without expecting anything in return. Let someone help you now. Her brother survived, and Emily, overwhelmed with gratitude, hugged Daniel tightly. I don't know how to thank you. You already have, he whispered. When Margaret passed away peacefully a year later, she left behind not just her fortune, but her wisdom. In her final letter to her son, she wrote, I was saved by a young woman who had nothing but heart. Through her, I remembered what true wealth means. Don't let money blind you, Daniel. Use it to heal, to build, to love. Daniel wept as he read it, and when he looked up, Emily was there, holding his hand, just as she had once held his mother's. Years later, St. Agnes Hospital unveiled a new wing, the Margaret Langford Center for Compassionate Care. At the ceremony, Daniel and Emily stood side by side. He had changed. The ruthless CEO was gone, replaced by a man who smiled easily and spoke of kindness as the world's greatest investment. As reporters took photos, one asked Emily, "What inspired you to become a nurse?" She smiled, eyes shining. Because sometimes, one act of compassion can save more than a life, it can change hearts. And as Daniel took her hand, the crowd applauded, unaware that the love between a poor young nurse and a billionaire's son had begun on a rainy morning, when a fainting old woman met an angel in scrubs. Moral of the story: kindness needs no audience, no reward. Sometimes, the smallest act of compassion sets in motion miracles greater than we can imagine.